A kind community center coordinator loses everything in one brutal day. So she does the unthinkable. A paper marriage with a quiet volunteer to keep a roof over her head. It's simple. It's safe. It strictly rules. Until a glossy magazine cover blows the lid off. Her stranger isn't ordinary at all. He's the most powerful CEO in town. Now the small fake promise sits on a live wire. A bitter ex stirring scandal, a community center on the line, workers' pensions at risk, and a tender spark neither of them planned. Secrets leak. Cameras swarm. The town picks sides. To survive, they must do the bravest thing. Tell the truth in public and trust it in private. But when the past fights back, will a fake marriage save a town, or blow up the only chance at real love? Grace's fingers trembled as she stared at the divorce papers on her kitchen counter. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting harsh shadows across Victor's signature, bold and flourishing, just like his ego. She touched the papers lightly, as if they might burn her fingertips, tracing the edge of the document that officially ended 7 years of marriage. The crisp legal text blurred before her eyes, a stark contrast to the flowery promises they'd once exchanged. The sharp rap at her door made her jump, yanking her back to reality. She hastily wiped her damp cheeks with the back of her hand before pulling the door open. Her landlord, Mr. Peterson, stood there with an apologetic look that made her stomach sink before he even spoke. His weathered face and fidgeting hands told her everything she needed to know. "Miss Grace, I hate to be the bearer of bad news." He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the faded welcome mat beneath their feet. "The rent checks from Mr. Ellery stopped coming 3 months ago. I've been trying to reach him, but—" He cleared his throat, the sound rough with discomfort. "The building's being sold. You'll need to find a new place within 2 weeks." Grace managed a nod, keeping her face carefully blank despite the panic blooming in her chest. "Thank you for letting me know," she said softly, closing the door before letting her shoulders slump. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood, breathing deeply to fight back the hot tears threatening to spill over. She grabbed her jacket, the blue one with frayed cuffs that Victor had always hated, and headed out, needing to move, to breathe, to escape the suffocating walls of what would soon no longer be her home. The autumn air bit at her cheeks as she walked the familiar route to the community center, crunching through rust-colored leaves that carpeted the sidewalk. The sky above her was shifting into evening colors, streaks of orange and pink painting the clouds. Inside the center, the bustle of the food pantry wrapped around her like a warm blanket. The familiar scents of cardboard boxes, canned goods, and coffee from the volunteers' station grounded her, pulling her away from her personal troubles. "Miss Grace?" Jenny, a local high school student with braces and a perpetually messy ponytail, called out. The teenager's eyes were worried beneath her purple-framed glasses. "I think I messed up sorting the canned goods. Everything was going fine until Mrs. Benson brought in that huge donation, and now I've got soups mixed with fruits and nothing's where it should be." "Let's take a look together," Grace said, grateful for the distraction from her own problems. She followed Jenny to the back shelves, her practiced eye quickly assessing the situation. She helped Jenny reorganize the shelves, explaining the system while the girl's tension slowly eased. "Remember, vegetables on the left, fruits in the middle, soups and stews on the right. Just like a meal on a plate." Later she found Mr. Martinez, a Vietnam veteran with silver hair and a slight limp, struggling with a heavy box of potatoes. His weathered hands trembled slightly with the effort, his face flushed. "Here, let me help with that," she offered, steadying his load and taking half the weight onto herself. "You're an angel, Miss Grace," he said with a grateful smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." A new voice joined the conversation. deep and calm like distant thunder. Need another pair of hands? Grace turned to see a tall man in well-worn jeans and a flannel shirt, rolled up at the sleeves to reveal strong forearms. His smile was gentle, his presence steady like an oak tree in a storm. A dusting of silver at his temples contrasted with otherwise dark hair and laugh-lines-framed eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You must be Daniel," Grace said, recognizing the name from the volunteer schedule. "Welcome to Organized Chaos." She gestured around the busy pantry, where a dozen volunteers moved between stations, sorting donations and preparing boxes. They worked side by side at the sorting table, falling into an easy rhythm without needing many words. Daniel's quiet efficiency matched her own, and she found herself relaxing despite the day's earlier blows. His movements were precise, economical, yet somehow gentle with the donated goods, as if respecting the journey they'd taken to reach those in need. "I'm pretty sure these green beans could survive nuclear winter," Daniel joked softly, examining a can's expiration date with a raised eyebrow. Grace couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising her after such a difficult day. "Our very own apocalypse preparation kit. Better put those on the use first shelf." As they worked, she noticed how he took time to learn everyone's names, how he lifted the heaviest boxes without being asked, how his calm presence seemed to settle the usual evening rush. He spoke little, but listened intently, his questions thoughtful and his rare smiles genuine. When Jenny dropped a box of cereal, scattering the contents across the floor, it was Daniel who knelt beside her with a dustpan before the girl could even start apologizing. The sky outside darkened to deep purple when Sarah, the center's director, a brisk woman with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on her head, gathered everyone for end-of-shift announcements. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as volunteers circled up, some leaning on brooms, others massaging sore backs. "Before you go," Sarah said, her voice carrying through the room, "just a reminder about our caretaker apartment. The renovation's finally done, but remember, grant rules require 2 adult residents for overnight coverage. The rent's minimal, utilities included." Her eyes lingered on Grace for a moment, meaningful and hopeful. "Think about it, folks. It's a great opportunity for someone who loves this place as much as we do." Grace kept her face neutral, but her mind raced behind the careful mask. The timing was almost too perfect to be coincidence. But taking on caretaker duties, living with a stranger, committing herself even more deeply to this place when her life was in such flux. She pushed the thought away with a laugh that she hoped sounded casual. That night, lying in bed, Grace stared at her ceiling where moonlight cast tree shadow patterns. Her calculator app glowed in the darkness as she added up moving costs, new rental deposits, utility transfers. Each total made her heart beat faster, each sum more impossible than the last. The weight of uncertainty pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her prayer was simple, desperate. "Please show me the way. I'm listening." She set her alarm for the next morning's pantry shift, determined to keep showing up, to keep helping others even when her own life felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet. "Maybe," she thought as she finally drifted off, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Tomorrow would bring answers. Maybe faith meant taking the next step, even when you couldn't see the whole path. A sheet of paper on her nightstand caught the moonlight, the community center's volunteer schedule for next week. Her name was there, alongside others who had become like family when her real family had fallen apart. For now, that would have to be enough. Her fingers brushed the paper before she turned over, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders against the autumn chill, seeping through her poorly insulated windows. The community center's old heating system groaned to life as Grace flicked on the lights. At 5:30 in the morning, the building felt both peaceful and lonely, its halls still dark except for the weak glow filtering through the windows. She loved these quiet moments before the day began, when she could hear herself think. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned to find Daniel, work boots dusty, and a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups in his hands. His expression was friendly but tentative, like someone approaching a shy cat. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "It's from Joe's Diner. They're the only place open this early that doesn't burn their coffee." Grace wrapped her cold fingers around the warm cup. "You're a lifesaver, but what brings you here so early?" Daniel leaned against the reception counter, his own coffee forgotten for a moment. "Had to drop Maya at band practice. She plays tuba. They're preparing for some competition next month." "Maya, my niece," he explained, his expression softening. "She's 14. My sister, she's a marine biologist, got a 3-year research position in the Pacific. Maya stayed with me instead of moving overseas. That's actually why I moved back to Milford." He took a sip of his coffee. "Needed a more stable environment for her than my old consulting life in Chicago." Grace nodded, understanding flowing between them. "Must be quite an adjustment." "Every day's an adventure." Daniel chuckled. "Yesterday she informed me that my dad jokes are tragically uncool, but she's a good kid, strong, smarter than I'll ever be." The morning light grew stronger, painting the walls in soft amber. Grace found herself sharing before she could think better of it. "My housing situation just imploded," she admitted. "The divorce papers came through yesterday, and it turns out my ex stopped paying the rent months ago. I have 2 weeks to find a new place." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's rough. And wrong. It is what it is." Grace shrugged, but her voice wavered slightly. They worked through the morning, organizing donations and helping early visitors. Around midday, Sarah, the director, called them both into her office. "About the caretaker apartment," Sarah began, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "We really need 2 responsible adults to make this work. The grant requirements are clear: overnight coverage, alternating schedules." She looked between them meaningfully. Daniel straightened in his chair. What exactly would that entail? As Sarah outlined the requirements, what started as nervous jokes evolved into serious discussion. Grace found herself taking notes: split utilities, separate bedrooms, shared common areas, alternating on-call nights. "We could draft a proper agreement," Daniel suggested. "Clear boundaries, shared responsibilities, 6-month review clause, everything in writing." Grace appreciated his methodical approach. "And a code of conduct to keep things professional?" "Absolutely." Daniel's expression was earnest. "Look, I know this is unconventional, but I want to be clear. I'll only help if you feel completely safe and comfortable with the arrangement. Maya and I can find another place if needed." The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows as they discussed practical details. Grace felt both terrified and relieved. It was a crazy idea, but it might just work. "I need a day," she finally said, "to think it through properly." Daniel nodded immediately. "Of course. How about we meet tomorrow after your shift? Say 9 at Joe's Diner? We can talk details then, if you're interested." That evening, Grace paced her apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "Am I crazy, Alina?" she asked her friend of 15 years. "Let me get this straight." Alina's nurse practical voice came through. "He's a responsible guardian to his teenage niece, volunteers regularly, and suggested putting everything in writing." "Honey, that's not crazy. That's surprisingly sensible." "But living with a stranger who brought you coffee at dawn and immediately started talking about boundaries and safety," Alina pointed out. Look, I'm not saying marry the guy, but as a temporary housing solution, you could do worse. Grace flopped onto her couch, staring at her ceiling. What if it gets weird? That's why you get everything in writing, and why you have me on speed dial. Alina's voice softened. Grace, honey, you need a safe place to land. This could be it. By 11 o'clock, Grace was in bed, her mind still churning but clearer. She set her alarm, knowing tomorrow's meeting at the diner would be crucial. She had questions prepared, boundaries to discuss, and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this could work. As she drifted off, the memory of Daniel's sincere expression stayed with her. I'll help, but only if this keeps you safe. In a world where her ex-husband had pulled the rug out from under her, that simple promise of respect meant more than she could express. Grace arrived at Riverside Diner 5 minutes early, sliding into a worn red vinyl booth by the window. The morning sun glinted off the river beyond, where cargo boats pushed steadily upstream, their wakes creating gentle ripples that caught the light. She pulled out a fresh notepad, smoothing her hand over the clean page, then smiled as Daniel appeared right at 9, still wearing his work boots with small traces of sawdust clinging to the laces. "Morning," he said, settling in across from her, the vinyl creaking softly under his weight. "I ordered coffee at the counter for both of us. Hope you still take it with just cream." "Thanks, that's perfect." Grace wrapped her hands around the warm mug when it arrived, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. Steam curled upward, carrying the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "So, should we tackle this systematically? I thought maybe a checklist approach would keep us on track." Daniel nodded, pulling out his own notebook, its corners dog-eared from being carried in his back pocket. "I made a list of considerations last night. Couldn't sleep much, to be honest. Legal requirements first? That seems like the foundation we need to build on." They spent the next hour mapping out guidelines between bites of buttery toast and sips of coffee that grew cooler as they worked. Grace's neat handwriting filled page after page. Marriage license for grant eligibility, separate finances, individual bank accounts, split utilities, clear exit terms. The sunlight shifted across their table, highlighting Daniel's focused expression as he considered each point carefully. 6-month review, Daniel suggested, uncapping a pen and circling the date in his calendar with deliberate strokes. "We can reassess then, see if it's working for everyone. That gives us enough time to settle in but doesn't leave us stuck if something isn't working." Grace added it to their growing list, her pen moving smoothly across the paper. "And co-caretaker duties, we should spell those out clearly. I don't want any misunderstandings about expectations." Agreed, alternating on-call nights, quiet hours for Maya's studying, shared maintenance responsibilities. He paused, a crease forming between his eyebrows. "Speaking of Maya, I talked with her this morning over breakfast. She understands it's a practical arrangement. She's a smart kid, doesn't miss much." They refined the details over a second round of coffee, the waitress refilling their mugs with a knowing smile. The diner filled and emptied around them as the morning progressed, the clatter of dishes and murmur of conversations creating a comfortable backdrop for their planning. By 11, they had a solid framework that felt both professional and protective, a roadmap for their unusual journey ahead. Sarah, the center's director, met them at her office to review their plan, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she examined their notes. She nodded approvingly at their thorough preparation, tapping a finger against their timeline. "I'll witness at the courthouse," she offered, her eyes kind behind her frames. "The sooner we get this settled, the better for everyone. The board is eager to have someone on site." The courthouse was quiet for a Wednesday afternoon, the marble floors echoing with their footsteps. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the polished surfaces. They waited on wooden benches until the clerk called them forward, Grace smoothing her skirt nervously as they stood. Under fluorescent lights, they exchanged simple vows with respectful gravity. No flowers, no rings, just clear voices promising basic legal obligations. The judge's matter-of-fact tone matched their pragmatic approach, his routine words taking on unexpected weight in the hushed chamber. Grace's hands were steady as she signed the marriage license, her signature flowing across the line with purpose. This wasn't about romance. It was about survival and service, about creating stability in uncertain times. Daniel's signature followed, his expression serious but kind, a gentle reassurance in his eyes when they briefly met hers. With the license filed, they returned to the community center to sign the caretaker contract, the afternoon sun casting long shadows as they walked from the parking lot. Sarah handed over 2 sets of keys, the metal warm from being clutched in her palm, her smile warm and encouraging. The apartments, ready whenever you are. We put in new blinds last week and fixed that leaky faucet. They agreed to move essential items that afternoon. Daniel arrived in his truck, the blue paint faded from years in the sun, carrying a toolbox and duffel bag that held just the basics. Grace followed in her small car, packed with necessities. Her grandmother's quilts with their intricate stitching, beloved cookbooks with dog-eared pages and margin notes, and a dented copper kettle found at a yard sale that somehow made tea taste better. The apartment was small but thoughtfully renovated, smelling of fresh paint and wood polish. 2 modest bedrooms flanked a shared living space with a compact kitchen featuring newly sealed countertops and a tiny balcony overlooking the center's garden where early spring flowers were beginning to push through the soil. Fresh paint brightened the walls in a soft cream color, and new locks gleamed on the doors, offering security and privacy. While Daniel tested the security system and emergency pager, methodically checking each component, Grace organized the kitchen, finding homes for spatulas and measuring cups. She hung a magnetic calendar on the fridge, creating a rotation for chores and on-call shifts, the colored markers bringing order to their new shared life. The familiar task of arranging kitchen tools helped settle her nerves, giving her hands something to do, while her mind processed the day's significance. Savory aromas soon filled the apartment as Daniel prepared a simple dinner, the sizzle of ingredients hitting the hot pan creating a homey soundtrack. "Hope you like skillet pasta," he said, stirring diced tomatoes into sautéed garlic, the wooden spoon scraping gently against the pan. "It's one of the few things I can cook without a recipe. Maya says it's edible, which is high praise from a teenager." "Smells wonderful," Grace assured him, setting out plates on the counter that served as their dining table, arranging forks and napkins with care. "I'm not picky, especially when someone else is doing the cooking." They took their first on-call round together at 9, flashlights in hand, walking the center's perimeter and checking all entries. The building settled quietly around them, security lights casting long shadows across empty hallways lined with children's artwork and community notices. Their footsteps echoed in the gymnasium, keys jingling softly as they locked each door behind them. By 10:30 they stood on the balcony, mugs of tea in hand, the porcelain warming their palms against the evening chill. Stars peppered the clear sky above, a carpet of distant lights, and crickets chirped in the garden below, an evening chorus rising from the shadows. "Thank you," Grace said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For doing this, for making it manageable. I was worried it would feel awkward, but you've been so respectful about everything." Daniel nodded, his profile thoughtful in the dim light, shoulders relaxed against the railing. "It's a good solution for everyone. We'll figure out the details as we go. That's how most things work anyway, right? One day at a time." They discussed practical matters for their tomorrow, more unpacking after work, coordinating shower schedules to avoid morning conflicts, setting up Wi-Fi and programming the coffee maker. The conversation was easy, focused on logistics rather than emotions, a comfortable dance around the unusual nature of their arrangement. As the night deepened toward 11, they moved toward their respective rooms, each carrying a box of personal items, books, photographs, small pieces of their separate lives. "Good night," they said simply, doors closing softly between them, marking the end of their first day as partners in this practical, unexpected marriage. The morning sun streamed through the apartment windows as Grace sorted through boxes at 7. She'd woken early, eager to create order in their shared space. Her fingers traced book spines as she arranged them on the shelf. Well-loved novels with dog-eared pages that held memories of rainy afternoons, cookbooks stained with the evidence of successful experiments, and a stack of business magazines she'd rescued from the donation bin yesterday. The familiar routine of organizing calmed her, giving her a sense of control in a life that had recently turned upside down. One magazine caught her eye, newer than the others, glossy and pristine. It hadn't come from the bin. The cover showed a man in a tailored charcoal suit, standing against a city skyline bathed in golden light. His posture was straight but not stiff, professional yet approachable. Daniel Hartwell, the quiet revolutionary reshaping Midwest manufacturing. The headline declared in bold letters across the bottom. Grace's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips, the steam curling around her suddenly wide eyes. The face on the cover was unmistakably Daniel's, her new roommate and legal husband of exactly 1 day. Same thoughtful eyes that seemed to see beyond surface appearances, same reserved half-smile that hinted at deeper thoughts, though he looked less comfortable in the suit than in the work boots she was used to seeing him wear while unloading donations at the community center. Her heart skipped a beat as the reality of who he was began to sink in. She set the magazine down carefully on the kitchen counter, mind spinning like a top. Daniel Hartwell. The pieces clicked into place like a puzzle finally taking form. His careful manner when discussing business, his practical problem-solving that always seemed to find the most efficient solution, the way he'd mentioned consulting work so vaguely whenever conversation turned to his professional life. The apartment door opened at 8:30, the sound of keys jangling breaking through her thoughts. Daniel stepped in, still in his navy jacket from dropping Maya at school. His cheeks were slightly flushed from the morning chill, and he stomped his feet lightly on the welcome mat. "Band practice runs late on Thursdays," he said, hanging his keys on the small hook by the door. "But she's excited about the new piece they're starting, something with a strong tuba section." He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze landing on the magazine lying open on the counter. His expression shifted subtly, a mixture of resignation and something that looked almost like relief. "So," Grace said gently, gesturing towards the magazine, "Daniel Hartwell." He sat down slowly at the small kitchen table, the wooden chair creaking slightly beneath his weight. "I should have told you sooner. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the strands falling back into place imperfectly. "I came back to help Maya adjust, to be present for her after everything she's been through. Using Hart lets me do that without the complications that come with the full name." "Complications?" Grace asked, sliding into the chair opposite him, her coffee forgotten. "People treat you differently when they know." His fingers traced an invisible pattern on the wooden tabletop. "They either want something or think they need to impress you. Conversations become transactions. I'd rather load boxes at the pantry and actually help than attend charity galas where everyone dresses up, writes checks, and nothing really gets done for the people who need it most." Grace nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "And Maya needs normal right now, not spotlight. She needs her uncle, not a CEO." Exactly. Relief crossed his face at her comprehension, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. I'm still the same person you've worked with at the center. The company runs well with good people in place. This is where I need to be right now, helping with real problems, getting my hands dirty. I get it, Grace said, and she did. She'd seen his genuine care for the pantry clients, the way he remembered their names and circumstances, his careful attention to Maya's needs even when she tried to hide them. The title didn't change that. If anything, it made his commitment to serving others more meaningful. After Daniel left for a morning meeting, promising to be back for dinner, Grace settled at her desk at the community center. The familiar sounds of children's laughter from the daycare room and seniors chatting in the recreation area provided a comforting backdrop as she reviewed the week's food distribution numbers. During her lunch break, curiosity led her to a business blog on her computer screen. The article was recent, dated just last month. Hartwell Industries reviews regional acquisitions. Her eyes skimmed the text, absorbing details about expansion plans and market strategies until they caught on a familiar name, Ellery Manufacturing. Her stomach clenched tight, like a fist closing around her insides. Victor's company. The one he'd built with creative accounting and corner cutting, though she hadn't known that until the end. The one whose stability he'd used to justify every moral compromise, every late night away from home, every cold dismissal of her concerns. The memories flooded back with painful clarity. Finding the altered documents, confronting him, watching his charming mask slip to reveal the calculating stranger beneath. The afternoon passed in a blur of food deliveries and volunteer coordination. Grace moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere as she checked inventory lists and signed delivery forms. At 6, she and Daniel served leftover casseroles at the pantry, working in comfortable synchronization despite her churning thoughts. She watched him interact with the clients, a gentle touch on an elderly man's shoulder, a genuine laugh at a child's joke, careful attention to a woman explaining her family's needs. As they cleaned up, wiping down counters and storing leftover food in the industrial refrigerators, Grace made a decision. Tomorrow morning, when they both had time and clear heads, she would tell him everything about Victor. About the divorce. Yes, he knew that part, but also about Victor's business practices, the things she'd discovered in those final months that had shattered not just her marriage, but her trust in her own judgment. Daniel deserved to know, both as her housemate and as someone potentially involving his company with Victor's web of deception. She watched Daniel stack the last chairs against the wall, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, completely at ease in this simple task, despite being CEO of a major corporation. His humility wasn't an act, it was woven into the fabric of who he was. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow they would talk. For now she focused on wiping down tables, letting the familiar work ground her like roots into soil. The truth could wait a few more hours, until they could give it the attention it deserved. She squeezed excess water from her cleaning cloth, the motion releasing some of the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders all afternoon. Some conversations needed space and time, and this one would definitely be one of those. The morning light was just breaking over the horizon as Grace sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Wisps of steam curled upward, disappearing into the golden rays that filtered through the half-drawn blinds. She'd been up since 6, rehearsing how to share this difficult truth, her stomach tied in knots that not even the comforting aroma of fresh coffee could untangle. Daniel joined her at 7, carrying his own cup of coffee, his footsteps quiet but purposeful on the tiled floor. "Thank you for meeting early," Grace said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. She traced her thumb along the rim of her mug, gathering courage. There's something important I need to tell you about Victor. About Ellery Manufacturing. Daniel settled into the chair across from her, the wooden legs scraping softly against the floor. His expression remained open and attentive, without a hint of impatience or judgment. "I'm listening," he said simply, placing his mug down and giving her his full attention. Grace took a deep breath, the weight of unsaid words heavy in her lungs. Victor and our marriage ended not just because of his affairs, though those hurt deeply. It was the control, the way he managed everything. Our money, my access to accounts, even which friends I could keep. Her fingers tightened around the mug until her knuckles whitened. He had this way of making me doubt myself, of twisting situations until I felt like I was the one at fault. But what really broke things was what I discovered about his business practices. She explained how she'd found suspicious documents while packing to leave, duplicate invoices with different amounts, vendor names that didn't exist, payment records that didn't match bank statements. The kitchen grew smaller as she spoke, the memories closing in around her. The accounting team whispered about it, but everyone was too afraid to speak up. Victor had a way of making problems disappear, along with the people who caused them. He called it corporate restructuring, but it was punishment, plain and simple. Daniel's face remained calm, but his eyes sharpened with understanding, like a lens coming into focus. He placed his palms flat on the table, as if grounding himself. "We've noticed discrepancies in our preliminary review. Our due diligence team flagged several irregularities in Ellery's books. Missing documentation, unusual cash flow patterns, discrepancies between reported earnings and actual assets. You're already investigating?" Grace's eyebrows lifted in surprise, a flicker of hope sparking within her. "Yes, but having insider context helps confirm our concerns. Sometimes the numbers tell a story, but they don't explain why." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a gentle but serious tone. "Grace, I want to be clear. Nothing about this affects you. You're not responsible for Victor's actions, and your position here is secure. I give you my word on that." Relief washed over her like warm water, loosening the tightness in her shoulders. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She twisted her hands together, the coffee forgotten. "But I'm worried about the employees. The older workers close to retirement with their pensions at risk, the young families living paycheck to paycheck. If Victor's schemes collapse suddenly, they'll be the ones who suffer most. Some of them have been with the company for 20 years or more." "We'll protect them," Daniel assured her, his voice firm with resolve. The morning light caught the determination in his eyes. "This isn't about revenge or corporate takeover tactics. It's about justice and making things right for everyone involved." He pulled out a notebook from his pocket, placing it between them like a bridge. "We need to document everything properly, create a record that stands up to scrutiny. Would you be willing to help gather testimonies from people you trust?" Grace nodded, sitting straighter now. Several former co-workers would talk if they knew it was safe, if they believed something would actually change this time. The head accountant, Rebecca, tried to warn me once about irregularities in the tax filings, but Victor transferred her to another division the very next day, 300 miles away from her elderly parents she was caring for. They spent the next hour outlining a plan, the kitchen table transforming into a war room of sorts. Grace would reach out to key contacts, Rebecca, who now worked remotely and might speak more freely, 2 former supervisors who'd left under questionable circumstances, and Miguel, a warehouse manager who'd questioned inventory discrepancies, only to be demoted to night shift. Daniel would engage an independent auditing firm through channels Victor wouldn't expect, using a subsidiary company name to avoid tipping him off. 1 week, Daniel said, marking the calendar on his phone with a decisive tap. "We'll gather what we can, build a solid foundation of evidence, then let the proper authorities take over. The SEC doesn't take these matters lightly, but we need to be careful. Victor won't go down without a fight, and he's shown he's willing to hurt people to protect himself. Over dinner that evening, the kitchen filled with the comforting scent of homemade pasta sauce, they developed safety protocols. Grace would never meet sources alone after dark. Every witness interview would have documentation with timestamps. They created a call tree for check-ins and chose secure locations for interviews, public enough to be safe, private enough to speak freely. Daniel showed her how to use an encrypted email service for sensitive documents, patiently walking her through the setup on her laptop. "Keep one copy of everything off-site," he advised, helping her set up a secure cloud storage account with two-factor authentication. His fingers moved confidently over the keyboard while explaining each step. "And use code names for all sources in your notes. If anything happens to your phone or computer, we don't want anyone identified." By 10 that night, Grace sat at her desk in the soft glow of her lamp, carefully typing up her first set of redacted notes. The cursor blinked steadily, like a heartbeat on the screen. She thought of Rebecca, whose career had stalled after her transfer, who she'd contact first thing tomorrow, of the assembly line workers whose overtime had mysteriously disappeared from paychecks, of the truth that would finally come to light after years of being buried under Victor's charm and threats. She set her alarm for early morning. Interviews would begin at 9 at a quiet coffee shop across town. Tomorrow would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and painful memories, but for the first time in months, she felt like she was doing something right. Not for revenge, but for justice. For all the people who deserved better than being pawns in Victor's games of financial chess. As she prepared for bed, washing her face and changing into soft cotton pajamas, Grace reflected on how different this morning's conversation could have gone. Instead of judgment, Daniel had offered support and partnership. Instead of exploitation, protection. It reinforced what she'd observed about him during their weeks working together. That titles aside, positions of power aside, he was simply someone who cared about doing what was right, even when it was difficult. She sent the encrypted notes to her secure email, closed her laptop with a soft click, double-checked her alarm, and turned out the light. The room fell into darkness except for the sliver of moonlight between the curtains. Tomorrow would be a long day, but a necessary one. For the first time since discovering Victor's deception, Grace felt like maybe the truth wouldn't destroy everything in its path. Maybe it could rebuild instead. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear as Grace made her way to St. Mark's Church basement. She'd chosen the weekly craft circle as her first meeting spot, a place where conversation flowed naturally between knitting needles and crochet hooks. Rebecca, the former head accountant, was already there, working on a pale blue scarf. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked the yarn. "I never thought anyone would actually look into this," she whispered, glancing around the quiet room. Grace kept her voice low, pretending to sort through a basket of yarn. "Just tell me what you remember. No pressure." Over the next hour, Rebecca detailed irregular payments and duplicate invoices. The vendor list kept growing, but half the names led nowhere. When I asked questions, Victor moved me to accounts receivable. Later that afternoon, Grace settled into the back corner of Suds and Such laundromat. Mike, the warehouse manager, folded towels while describing inventory discrepancies. Shipments marked as received, but empty pallets in storage. Numbers never adding up, but the books showing perfect balance. She jotted notes in what looked like a grocery list notebook, using simple codes Daniel had suggested. The familiar hum of dryers covered their conversation. At 7 that evening, Grace and Daniel stood before a whiteboard in their apartment, converting her day's findings into a clean timeline. Daniel wrote in neat block letters while Grace read from her notes. April 15th, Invoice 8732 to Summit Solutions. No matching delivery record. Daniel marked it on the board. They worked through the information methodically, breaking only to heat up homemade vegetable soup. The simple meal steamed in ceramic bowls as they continued organizing the evidence. Wednesday brought more meetings. In the library's reading room, Grace met Sarah, a former purchasing clerk. Behind a wall of reference books, Sarah described mysterious maintenance charges. Every month, huge payments to companies I'd never heard of. When I asked for documentation, Victor said it was classified. The afternoon found Grace at the park chess tables, listening to Tom, a retired quality inspector. He moved pawns across the board while detailing shipments that never arrived. The paperwork was perfect, but the loading dock was empty. That evening, Grace and Daniel again stood before their whiteboard. They ate omelettes with toast while adding new details to their timeline. Yellow sticky notes marked patterns, red ones flagged urgent concerns. After their 9 o'clock security rounds, they paused on the stairs near the center's gymnasium. The building settled around them, creaking quietly in the evening coolness. "How do you handle it?" Grace asked, her voice soft in the dim hallway. "Knowing people might be hurting others, but still believing in goodness?" Daniel considered this, his hands clasped loosely over his knees. "I think real courage isn't about big dramatic moments. It's in small choices, telling the truth when it's hard, helping others when you're tired, doing what's right even when no one's watching." Grace nodded, thinking of Rebecca's trembling hands, of Sarah's whispered confessions. Like all these people, sharing their stories even though they're scared. Exactly. They're not looking for revenge or glory. They just want things to be right. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the building's heating system. "You know what gives me hope?" Grace said finally. "How many people still care about doing good, not for recognition or reward, just because it's right?" Daniel smiled. "That's what I've always loved about small towns like Milford. Behind all the ordinary routines, the craft circles and laundromats and chess games, there's real community, people looking out for each other." By the time Grace headed to bed that night, just before 11, her mind was already turning to tomorrow. The community center held its own stories, its own truths waiting to be shared. She'd built trust here over years of small kindnesses and steady presence. Now it was time to strengthen those bonds, to show people that doing right mattered more than looking away. She set her alarm, thinking about Daniel's words about ordinary courage. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest choices, like telling the truth over a cup of coffee or standing up for what's right while folding laundry. Those moments mattered just as much as any grand gesture. As she drifted off, Grace felt grateful for all the quiet heroes she'd met these past 2 days. People who chose truth over comfort, who trusted her with their stories. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the center, but she was ready to face them, one honest conversation at a time. The sound of late-night traffic drifted through her window, a gentle reminder of the town continuing its normal rhythms even as important work was being done. Grace pulled her quilt higher, comfortable in the knowledge that good people were everywhere, waiting for a chance to make things right. Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear as Grace walked the community center's halls, her mind churning with possibilities. She paused by the bulletin board, studying the various group schedules when an idea sparked. "What if we brought everyone together?" She proposed to the director in her office. A fix-it and food truck night. The robotics club could repair small appliances, the quilting circle could mend clothes, and we could have local food trucks in the parking lot. The director's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant, Grace. It would bring in funds for the center and create exactly the kind of community gathering we need." Grace pulled out her planning notebook. Saturday evening would be perfect. People are more relaxed, more willing to chat. By lunch, Grace had secured commitments from 3 food trucks: Tommy's Tacos, Sweet Street Desserts, and the popular burger bus. The robotics club advisor enthusiastically agreed, saying his students needed real-world repair practice. "My kids will love this," he said. "They're tired of just building competition robots." The quilting circle, led by Eleanor, who'd been teaching sewing for 30 years, immediately offered to set up a mending station. "We'll bring our machines and extra supplies. Everyone has something that needs fixing." Daniel appeared in the doorway as Grace was making calls about permits. Without fanfare, he offered to handle the event insurance and tool rentals. "It's the least I can do," he said quietly. "This is exactly what the center needs." Friday afternoon transformed the community center's courtyard. Grace and Daniel hung string lights while Maya and her band friends tested the sound system. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. "Mom would love this," Maya said as she helped untangle light strands. "She always said music brings people together." Grace smiled, watching the teenager carefully coil cables. "Your mum sounds very wise." "She is." Maya nodded. "She's doing important research, but she makes sure to call every Sunday." She paused. "Uncle Daniel's different since we moved here. Happier, I think." Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather. At 5 o'clock, the courtyard filled with the aroma of grilled burgers and the sound of Maya's band playing a jazzy version of "When the Saints Go Marching In." Their tuba player, a shy freshman named Kevin, surprised everyone with the impressive solo. Inside, the main room hummed with activity. The robotics club set up 4 repair stations, complete with tools and safety equipment. Teenagers in safety goggles carefully diagnosed broken toasters and malfunctioning coffee makers, their faces intent with concentration. At the mending station, Eleanor and her quilting circle created a warm, welcoming space. They worked steadily, replacing zippers and patching worn jeans while chatting with community members. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everyday concerns and deeper worries. Grace noticed several Ellery manufacturing employees drifting through. Tom from accounting lingered by the coffee station, eventually sharing details about mysterious international wire transfers. Sarah from purchasing described more questionable vendors while having her favorite cardigan repaired. The numbers just never made sense, she whispered, watching Eleanor's careful stitching. But who could we tell? Daniel moved through the crowd quietly, helping where needed, holding tools for the robotics students, carrying chairs for elderly visitors, making sure the food truck lines moved smoothly. His presence was steady but unobtrusive, exactly what the evening required. At 8 o'clock, Maya's band played their final set. The young musicians had improved noticeably even since their afternoon practice, feeding off the energy of the appreciative crowd. Grace watched Daniel's face soften with pride as Maya played. The gathering began winding down around 9. People lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth of community. The robotics club had successfully repaired 23 appliances. The quilting circle had mended 37 items. More importantly, Grace had gathered crucial new information about Victor's schemes, shared freely by people who finally felt safe enough to speak. As volunteers stacked chairs at 9:30, Grace caught Daniel's eye across the room. In that moment, their shared look carried deep gratitude for the evening's success, for their growing partnership, for the trust they'd built. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it held the quiet potential of something genuine. They locked up at 10, double-checking all doors and windows. The autumn night had turned cool, and their breath made small clouds in the air as they walked home. "Thank you," Grace said simply, "for everything tonight." Daniel nodded. "It was all you, Grace. You knew exactly what people needed. A reason to come together, to help each other, to share their stories. They climbed the stairs to their apartment in comfortable silence. At the door, Grace turned to him. "Tomorrow we should organize everything we've learned, create a clear picture." "Agreed," Daniel said. "We'll start after breakfast?" Grace nodded, thinking of all the puzzle pieces they'd gathered, each small truth contributing to the larger whole. The evidence was mounting, but more importantly, the community was healing, finding its voice one repaired toaster and mended seam at a time. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, the October air carrying the first hints of autumn's full embrace. After church, Grace and Daniel settled at their kitchen table, spreading out notebooks and laptops with methodical care. Golden sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patches across their papers and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between them as they began organizing their findings. "Let's keep it simple," Daniel suggested, opening a fresh document on his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, steady and purposeful. 3 clear sections we can build on, something straightforward that presents the facts without unnecessary complications. Grace nodded, pulling out her carefully coded notes, color-tabbed and annotated in her neat handwriting. "Observations first, just the facts we can verify. We need to be absolutely certain about everything we put forward." They worked methodically, typing up what they'd learned, shoulders occasionally brushing as they leaned in to compare notes. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking their progress. Under observations, they listed dates, amounts, and patterns, careful to use initials instead of full names to protect their sources. Line by line, entry by entry, the evidence painted a troubling picture of systematic deception at Ellery Manufacturing, a web of dishonesty that had ensnared innocent workers. "Here's another entry," Grace said, consulting her notes, tapping a highlighted section with her pen. "March 15th. Purchase order for industrial equipment that never arrived. 3 employees confirmed they processed the paperwork, but the machines were phantom purchases." Her brow furrowed with concern for the people who had unknowingly participated in the deception. Daniel added it to the document, his fingers moving steadily across the keyboard, the soft clicking sounds filling the quiet kitchen. "The pattern's clear, but we need to protect our sources. Some of these people are risking their livelihoods to help us." His voice carried the weight of responsibility, understanding exactly what was at stake for those who had trusted them. In the open questions section, they outlined gaps that needed investigation, unexplained inventory discrepancies that appeared monthly in specific departments, unusual shipping routes that zigzagged across state lines unnecessarily, and consulting fees that seemed excessive for services that couldn't be verified by anyone they interviewed. "The remedies section is crucial," Daniel said, rubbing his tired eyes, leaning back in his chair with a sigh that revealed how deeply he cared about doing this right. "We need to focus on protecting the workers first. They're the innocent ones in all this." Grace agreed, thinking of the families who depended on those paychecks. Mortgages, college tuitions, medical bills, all hanging in the balance. "The pension fund has to be our priority. Some of these people have worked there for 30 years, counting on that money for retirement. They trusted the company with their futures." Her voice softened, remembering the faces of the older workers she'd met through the community center. At 3 o'clock, the sound of tuba scales filled the apartment, the deep brass notes vibrating through the walls. Maya had set up in the spare room, practicing diligently for an upcoming concert. The steady bass notes provided an oddly comforting backdrop to their work, a reminder of normal life continuing alongside their investigation. "She's getting better," Grace observed with a genuine smile, her head tilting slightly to better hear the music. "That high B-flat was really clear. Last week she couldn't hit it without it cracking." Daniel's face softened with undisguised pride, the stern lines of concentration melting away. She practices every day, never complains even when her lips are sore or her arms ache from holding it up. That tuba weighs almost as much as she did when she was 10. His eyes crinkled at the corners with the memory. By 4, they had a solid draft, pages of evidence organized into a compelling narrative of corporate misconduct. Maya emerged from the spare room, her dark hair slightly messy, cheeks flushed from playing, the effort of handling the massive instrument evident in her tired smile. "Can we order pizza?" she asked hopefully, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm absolutely starving. Playing tuba burns like 1,000,000 calories." They spread out on the living room floor with their feast. 1 pepperoni with extra cheese for Maya and Daniel, 1 veggie supreme that Grace preferred but was willing to share. Cardboard boxes opened on the coffee table, the savory aroma filling the apartment. Maya told them about her upcoming band concert while they ate, her enthusiasm infectious as she described the music selections and how her band director had given her a small solo. "You'll both come, right?" she asked, reaching for another slice, a string of cheese stretching from the box to her plate. Her eyes moved between them, seeking confirmation. "Wouldn't miss it for anything in the world," Grace assured her, catching Daniel's grateful look. A silent acknowledgement of how seamlessly she had woven herself into their lives, creating a family where before there had only been a guardian and his niece. At 5:30 they headed downstairs to help set up for the fundraiser. The community center's main room had been transformed with string lights hanging from exposed ceiling beams and small cafe tables arranged to create intimate seating areas. Local bands were setting up their equipment on the small stage, doing sound checks that echoed through the space, microphone taps and guitar riffs bouncing off the walls. Grace moved between tables, adjusting centerpieces of autumn flowers and checking that everything was ready, a practiced eye catching details others might miss. She wore a simple blue dress she'd found at the back of her closet, surprised it still fit after years unworn. The soft fabric swished around her knees as she worked. When she looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, she caught Daniel watching her from across the room. He'd changed into a clean white shirt that made him look both more approachable and more handsome, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. The music started at 6, the first band launching into an upbeat cover song that immediately lightened the mood. Families filled the tables, neighbors greeting each other warmly, children dancing freely to upbeat songs in the open space near the stage. Laughter mingled with music, creating a soundtrack of community healing. The atmosphere was festive, healing, exactly what their community needed after months of uncertainty and worry about the factory's future. As the evening progressed, a local band started playing At Last, its melody sweet and timeless, the singer's voice rich and soulful. Daniel approached Grace where she stood near the refreshment table, arranging cookies on a platter. "Would you like to dance?" he asked softly, extending his hand, a vulnerability in his eyes that she rarely saw. Grace hesitated, her fingers stilling on the plate. "I haven't danced since—" She trailed off, memories of her wedding day flickering through her mind. Another dance, another man, promises that had shattered like glass. "We can make new memories," Daniel said gently, his hand still outstretched, patient and unwavering. "Better ones." She took his hand, letting him lead her to the dance floor, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. His touch was respectful, careful, one hand resting lightly at her waist as they began to move. They swayed slowly to the music, and Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from the pure, unexpected joy of the moment, of connection without expectation. Whatever this becomes, Daniel murmured, his voice barely audible above the music, his breath warm against her hair. "I'll honor it with the truth. No more secrets between us. Ever." Grace looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the steadiness she had come to rely on. Their faces drew closer, the moment suspended in time, and their lips met in a brief, tender kiss that carried the weight of new beginnings. It felt like a door opening, sunlight streaming through after a long darkness. They continued dancing until the song ended, bodies swaying in perfect harmony, then separated naturally, both aware of the shift that had occurred between them. The rest of the evening passed in a happy blur of music, laughter, and community. Maya joining them for dessert, neighbors stopping by their table to chat, moments of connection that stitched them more firmly into the fabric of their town. At 9, after the last guests left and the cleanup was done, chairs stacked, tablecloths folded, lights unplugged, they walked upstairs together, footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The air felt different somehow, lighter, charged with possibility. Joy had entered their careful arrangement, transforming it into something neither had expected, but both welcomed with cautious hearts. "We should finish reviewing the memo tomorrow," Grace said as they reached their door, fishing keys from her purse. "Make sure it's ready for your board call on Tuesday. There's still the section on financial impact we need to strengthen." Daniel nodded, unlocking the apartment with steady hands. "First priority is protecting those pensions. We'll make it right, however long it takes." His voice carried the quiet determination that had drawn her to him from the beginning, a man who meant what he said. They said goodnight at their respective bedroom doors, each carrying the warmth of the evening's dance in their hearts. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, but tonight had shown them something precious. Hope could bloom in the most unexpected places, even in the midst of uncovering painful truths. Grace woke before her alarm on Monday, her mind already churning with possibilities. The first rays of sunlight were just beginning to peek through her window as she sat up in bed, reaching for her notebook. An idea had formed during the night, a way to protect everyone involved while still moving forward with positive change. She padded to the kitchen in her slippers, starting the coffee maker before settling at the small dining table. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle humming of the refrigerator and distant sounds of Maya getting ready for school. Grace began sketching out her thoughts. A benefit corporation subsidiary could be the perfect solution. Unlike traditional corporations, Benefit Corp were legally required to consider social impact alongside profits. She wrote quickly, outlining how they could structure the deal to permanently protect the pensions, ensure local hiring practices, and mandate community investment. The framework would make these commitments legally binding, not just promises that could be broken later. Daniel emerged from his room, already dressed for the day. "You're up early," he observed, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "I think I found a way," Grace said, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. She explained her Benefit Corporation idea, while Daniel listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This could work," he said finally, looking impressed. "It addresses everyone's needs while creating lasting protections." Maya appeared, backpack slung over one shoulder, her tuba case by the door. "Ready, Uncle Daniel." "Right on time." He smiled, grabbing his keys. "I'll be back in about 20 minutes," he told Grace. While they were gone, Grace refined her draft, adding specific metrics for community investment and employment targets. She included provisions for profit sharing with long-term employees and requirements for local supplier contracts when possible. Daniel returned just before 9, bringing fresh bagels from the corner bakery. They spread their work across the dining table, carefully merging Grace's framework with their evidence memo. The benefit corporation structure would create a legal shield for their reforms, while the documented evidence provided leverage for implementing them. The board will need to see how this protects shareholder value too, Daniel noted, adding financial projections to their document. Grace nodded, understanding the balance required. We can show how community investment reduces turnover and increases productivity. Plus, the goodwill value is significant. They worked steadily through the morning, breaking only for quick snacks and coffee refills. By noon, they had a comprehensive proposal that addressed both the problems they'd uncovered and the path forward. Around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at their door. Mrs. Peterson from the quilting circle stood there holding a plate of chocolate cupcakes, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Just wanted to bring you two some treats," she said warmly. "Everyone's still talking about how sweet you looked dancing together at the fundraiser." Grace accepted the plate with a thank you, trying not to blush. More visitors followed throughout the afternoon, each bearing baked goods and barely concealed interest in their relationship. The community's response to their marriage was touching, if a bit overwhelming. "Focus," Grace reminded herself after the third visitor left. There would be time to sort out their personal situation later. Right now, they needed to prepare for Daniel's video conference. At 6 o'clock sharp, Daniel connected with his general counsel and audit chair. Grace sat quietly beside him, taking notes as he walked through their findings and proposed solution. The lawyers asked pointed questions about the benefit corporation structure, while the audit chair delved into the financial implications. "Forward us the anonymized memo and benefit corp framework," the general counsel requested. "We'll review it before tomorrow's board call." After the call ended, Daniel let out a long breath. They're taking it seriously. That's a good sign. They spent the evening reviewing their documentation one final time, ensuring every detail was perfect. The string lights they'd forgotten to take down from the fundraiser cast a warm glow through the windows, making their workspace feel cozy despite the serious nature of their task. At 9:30, Grace made chamomile tea while Daniel sent the final emails to his team. They settled on the small couch, mugs in hand, allowing themselves to relax slightly. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly, "for helping make this right." Grace looked at him, seeing both the powerful CEO and the kind man who volunteered at food pantries. "Thank you for being willing to try something different." They discussed the schedule for tomorrow. Daniel would take the board call at 3 from their apartment office, while Grace took Maya to band practice. It would keep the common areas quiet and give Daniel space to handle what could be a challenging conversation. As they prepared for bed around 10, there was a cautious optimism in the air. They had done everything possible to prepare. Now they just had to wait for tomorrow's response from the board. "Good night, Grace," Daniel said softly as they headed to their rooms. "Good night," she replied, her mind already turning to tomorrow's possibilities. Not just for the business deal, but for everything else that seemed to be blooming between them. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cool. Grace woke early, made coffee, and packed Maya's lunch while Daniel reviewed his board presentation one last time. Everything felt normal until 8:15 a.m., when Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Have you seen WealthWatch? Call me, now." Grace's hands shook as she pulled up the website. There, splashed across the screen in bold letters, "Fake bride, real money, CEO's marriage of convenience exposed." Their courthouse photo was front and center, along with a copy of their marriage license. Sources close to Victor Ellery reveal strategic timing behind Hartwell Industries CEO's sudden marriage, the article declared. Inside sources suggest the union coincides suspiciously with pending acquisition talks. Daniel came into the kitchen, his face grim. "Victor's PR team leaked it. They're trying to discredit us before the board meeting." Grace's phone kept buzzing. Emma called 3 times before Grace answered. "This is bad," Emma said, her nurse's practicality showing through. "The clinic's already getting calls, some big donors threatening to pull funding from the community center too." Grace's stomach churned. "It's barely noon." "You need to lay low," Emma advised. "Let it blow over." Maya burst through the door, tears in her eyes. She thrust her phone at Daniel. The school mum's chat was filled with nasty comments about her uncle and Grace. "They're saying awful things," Maya choked out. "That you're both liars and..." Grace pulled Maya into a hug while Daniel scrolled through the messages, his jaw tight. "I'll call the school," he said quietly. At 1 o'clock, Grace sat in their tiny office, drafting her resignation letter. Maybe if she left now, disappeared quietly, Daniel's reputation could recover. The center could find new caretakers. Maya wouldn't have to face more cruel messages. But something made her wait. The board meeting was at 3. She owed Daniel that much at least. Daniel set up the video call in their office while Grace took Maya to band practice. "No matter what happens," he told Grace, "we did the right thing. Remember that." The board meeting lasted 2 hours. Grace paced the community center's hallways, straightening already straight frames and reorganizing already organized supplies. When she returned at 5, Daniel looked tired, but not defeated. "They're concerned about optics," he reported. "But the Benefit Corporation plan, they see its potential. Several board members actually praised the innovation." Grace nodded, but her mind was made up. "I'll move out in the morning," she said softly. "It's the only way to calm this down. You can't risk your reputation, the company, Maya's peace of mind." "Grace, please," she interrupted. "Just let me do this. 1 night to pack, and I'll be gone before anyone notices." Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just asked, "Give me tonight to think, please?" They moved through the evening in careful silence. Maya practiced her tuba, the low notes seeming sadder than usual. They ate dinner together, no one mentioning the elephant in the room. At 9:30, Maya hugged them both extra tight before bed. After Maya's door closed, Daniel went to the balcony. Through the window, Grace could see him praying, his head bowed, shoulders tense. She retreated to her room, but sleep wouldn't come. At 11, she heard Daniel in the kitchen, making tea. She wanted to join him, to talk about everything they'd left unsaid. But she stayed in her room, staring at the ceiling, her heart aching. Across the hall, she could hear him pacing. Tomorrow they would have to face the town, the rumors, the judgment. But tonight they were just 2 people, caught between duty and desire, trying to do the right thing. Grace rolled over, clutching her pillow, knowing Daniel was awake too. The string lights outside cast shifting shadows on her wall as midnight approached. Tomorrow would change everything. But for now, in the quiet dark, they held their separate vigils, each praying for guidance, strength, and maybe even a miracle. The wall clock ticked past 11:30. Neither of them slept, both acutely aware of the other's wakeful presence and the weight of decisions that waited with the dawn. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Grace wheeled her small suitcase into the hallway. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as she paused at the kitchen counter, hands trembling slightly as she placed the folded note under Daniel's coffee mug. "Dear Daniel," she'd written, "sometimes doing the right thing means stepping away. Maya deserves peace. You deserve respect. The center deserves support. Thank you for showing me what real integrity looks like. Grace." She closed the apartment door quietly behind her, not wanting to wake either Daniel or Maya. The early morning air felt crisp against her face as she made her way down the street toward the bus stop. A few early risers nodded hello as they passed, probably wondering about the suitcase, but too polite to ask. Back in the apartment, Daniel found the note at 7:10, his coffee forgotten as he read Grace's words. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time. He burst out of the building, scanning the street before spotting her familiar figure at the corner. "Grace!" he called out, jogging to catch up with her. "Wait!" She turned, eyes glistening. "Daniel, please, don't make this harder." He caught his breath, looking at her with unwavering certainty. Truth doesn't ruin what's real. Grace clutched her suitcase handle tighter. "I won't be the reason Maya gets bullied," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Those messages yesterday. She shouldn't have to deal with that." Daniel stepped closer, his expression gentle but determined. Running away won't stop the rumors. It'll just confirm what they want to believe. A morning breeze rustled the trees along the street as they stood there, the weight of their choices hanging between them. Finally, Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "Come back upstairs. Let's face this together." They walked back to the apartment, their footsteps in sync. Maya was awake when they returned, relief flooding her face at seeing Grace. At 8 o'clock, Daniel called the center director. "We'd like to use the front lawn at noon," he explained. "It's time for the truth." The director agreed immediately. "I'll send out notices to the board and staff." Daniel spent the next 2 hours drafting his statement, refusing the suggested PR spin from his corporate communications team. His words were simple, direct, and honest. He admitted to withholding his identity, explained his reasons, and took full responsibility for any confusion or hurt it may have caused. At 10 o'clock, he shared the draft with his board members. "I came to Milford seeking quiet service and a stable home for my niece. I chose to use a shortened version of my name to avoid attention. That decision, while well-intentioned, was wrong. You deserve transparency from someone who works alongside you in this community. My marriage to Grace began as a practical solution to the center's needs, but it has become something genuine and meaningful. We will continue to serve this community with honesty and dedication." Maya had been listening from the hallway. She stepped into the office, her school uniform already on. "Uncle Daniel, will telling the truth really help?" Daniel turned to face his niece, seeing both worry and hope in her eyes. "It's the only thing that ever has, sweetheart. Being honest might not fix everything immediately, but it's the foundation for everything good that follows." Grace watched their interaction, her heart warming at the bond between uncle and niece. She'd been organizing files to keep her hands busy, but now she paused. "Maya, are you sure you want to be there when we make the statement? You don't have to be." Maya straightened her shoulders. "I want to be there. We're family now, right? Even if it started differently than most families do." The morning passed quickly after that. Daniel fielded calls from board members, while Grace coordinated with the center staff to set up chairs on the lawn. Local reporters began arriving around 11:30, followed by curious neighbors and community center regulars. By 11:50, a substantial crowd had gathered on the sun-dappled lawn. The quilting circle ladies sat in their usual cluster, whispering among themselves. Teen volunteers from the robotics club stood at the back, phones lowered for once. Even some of the food truck owners from Saturday's event had come, their expressions supportive. Daniel adjusted the microphone stand while Grace and Maya stood nearby. The string lights from the weekend still hung in the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Grace caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. Emma from the clinic, the veteran who came to the food pantry, the librarian who had helped her research. As the clock approached noon, Daniel took a deep breath and stepped toward the microphone. Grace and Maya moved to stand behind him, a united front facing whatever came next. The murmur of the crowd quieted as Daniel cleared his throat, ready to speak his truth to the community he'd grown to love. The microphone crackled softly as Daniel began speaking, his voice steady and clear in the midday sun. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I owe this community the truth, plainly spoken." He paused, looking at the gathered faces. "My full name is Daniel Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries. I chose to use a shortened version of my name, Daniel Hart, when I moved here with my niece Maya. That wasn't the right choice, even though my reasons were simple. I wanted to serve quietly and give Maya a normal life." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Daniel continued calmly. "Grace and I entered into a legal marriage to fulfill the center's requirement for 2 resident caretakers. We kept separate finances and followed clear boundaries. What started as a practical arrangement has grown into deep mutual respect and care for this community." He shifted slightly, his tone becoming more businesslike. "Regarding Ellery Manufacturing, yes, Hartwell Industries considered acquisition. However, we're announcing today that Hartwell will conduct a full integrity review led by an independent firm. We welcome regulatory oversight and community input." Grace stepped forward when Daniel gestured to her. She spoke softly but firmly into the microphone. "Kindness shouldn't need a disguise," she said. "Every day I see this community lift each other up. That's what matters, not rumors or headlines, but how we treat each other." Hands shot up across the lawn. A local reporter called out, "Mr. Hartwell, was this marriage a corporate strategy?" "No," Daniel replied firmly. "Grace didn't know my identity when we agreed to the caretaker arrangement. She learned about it afterward, just like everyone else." Another voice cut through. "Grace, did you know about the Ellery Manufacturing deal?" "I learned about it after discovering Daniel's identity," she answered honestly. "My ex-husband works there, but I haven't been involved with the company for years." The questions continued for nearly an hour. Daniel and Grace answered each one directly, their calm responses gradually easing the tension in the crowd. Maya stood tall beside them, occasionally squeezing Grace's hand when particularly pointed questions came up. By 1:30, people began drifting away. Some stopped to shake Daniel's hand or pat Grace's shoulder. The center's director brought them water and quietly mentioned that supportive comments were starting to appear on local social media, outweighing the negative ones. They spent the afternoon in their apartment, processing the morning's events. At 3:00, Daniel received the call he'd been waiting for. His board had voted to pause the Ellery Manufacturing acquisition pending the integrity review. Moreover, they requested that any future deal incorporate the benefit corporation structure Grace had proposed, protecting pensions and local jobs. "They liked your framework," Daniel told Grace after hanging up. "They said it showed foresight and community investment." Grace managed a tired smile. "That's good news. Should we head down for homework help?" The center's after-school program started at 6 as usual. Grace took her regular spot at the math table, helping a 7th grader work through pre-algebra problems. Across the room, Daniel knelt by the copier, tools spread out as he fixed a paper jam. The familiar sounds of Maya's tuba scales drifted from the music room, mixing with the scratch of pencils and quiet conversations. "Ms. Grace," whispered one of her regular students, "are you still going to be here, even with everything in the news?" Grace looked up from the math problem. "Of course I am. This is home." By 9:00, they were back upstairs, the 3 of them washing mugs from evening coffee and hot chocolate. Maya yawned as she dried the last cup. "Can I go practice for 15 more minutes?" she asked. "The band concert's next week." Daniel nodded. 15 minutes, then bed. As Maya disappeared into her room, Grace leaned against the counter. "We made it through," she said softly. "We did." Daniel placed the last mug in the cabinet. "How are you feeling?" tired, but at peace. She smiled slightly. It's good not to have secrets anymore. Daniel checked his phone. The auditors want to meet first thing tomorrow. You okay with that? Yes, Grace said. One day at a time. They finished tidying the kitchen, moving around each other with the ease of people who had found their rhythm. The sound of Maya's tuba, muted but determined, filled their small apartment, a reminder that life would go on, honest and imperfect and real. The review team set up base in a neutral conference room at the public library, away from both Hartwell Industries and Ellery Manufacturing. Each morning, men and women in business attire carried stacks of folders through the library's quiet halls, their faces serious as they pieced together the financial puzzle. Grace provided her carefully organized notes, each story stripped of identifying details but rich with specifics, dates, invoice numbers, discrepancies that couldn't be explained away. Daniel attended the initial briefing but stayed away afterward, determined to keep the process independent. We need to hear from current employees, the lead auditor told Grace on Friday. But they're scared. The machine shop closes at 3. Grace said. The second shift comes in through the back lot. I know a diner nearby. Throughout the week, machinists with decades of experience found their way to quiet booths, ordering coffee and speaking in low voices about missing inventory and questionable repairs. Young parents from the accounting department shared spreadsheets during their lunch breaks, pointing out patterns that made them uncomfortable. Maya's band friend's father, who drove a delivery truck, described routes that never reached their destination. The paperwork looked right, he said, stirring his coffee. But the addresses, something wasn't adding up. The weekend brought no rest. The review team worked through Saturday and Sunday, cross-referencing testimonies with documentation. Grace kept the center running smoothly, while Daniel handled urgent calls from his board between helping with maintenance tasks. Monday afternoon, the situation shifted. A formal regulatory inquiry opened into Ellery Manufacturing's financial practices. The news spread quickly through town, causing both relief and anxiety. They're doing the right thing, Daniel assured Grace that evening as they prepared dinner. The truth needs daylight. Tuesday brought confrontation. Grace had gone to the courthouse to file some paperwork for the center when Victor appeared, blocking her path in the third-floor corridor. His expensive suit couldn't mask the rage in his eyes. You'll regret crossing me, he sneered, stepping closer. You think you're so clever, playing house with Hartwell? I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. Grace stood her ground, though her heart raced. Step back, Victor. 2 retired court clerks watched from their desk, their presence preventing Victor from moving closer. Later that afternoon, they provided detailed statements about the incident to both security and the review team. Wednesday arrived with a weight of anticipation. The center hummed with its usual activities, senior yoga in the morning, teen tutoring after school. But everyone felt the undercurrent of waiting. At 5 o'clock, Daniel received the call in their apartment office. Grace and Maya sat on the couch, pretending to read but watching his face. He listened intently, asking occasional questions, making notes in his precise handwriting. Finally, he set down his phone. The board approved moving forward, but only under the benefit corporation structure, full pension protection, worker advisory council with real power, and, he smiled at Grace, a permanent endowment for the community center. Maya jumped up from the couch. Does this mean everything's okay now? It means we did the right thing, Grace answered, pulling her close. And that helps make things okay. At 7 o'clock, they walked together to the small chapel next to the center. The evening air was cool and clean. Inside, the chapel was quiet except for the soft crackle of candles already burning in the alcove. Grace lit the first votive candle, its flame steady and bright. For the workers who were hurt, she whispered, for justice and healing. Daniel lit the second, his hands perfectly still. For future students, for opportunities and wisdom. Maya stepped forward with the third candle. For courage, she said clearly. For telling the truth even when it's hard. They sat in the wooden pews for a while, watching the flames dance in the dim light. No one spoke. No words were needed. The chapel held their prayers in its ancient walls, adding them to decades of hopes and fears and answered prayers. Later, they walked home under a sky full of stars. The air had grown cooler, but none of them rushed. Maya hummed a tune from band practice. Grace and Daniel walked close enough for their shoulders to brush occasionally. "Normal duties tomorrow?" Grace asked, looking up at the clear sky. "Normal duties?" Daniel agreed. "The center needs us." Maya yawned. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast? Before my morning practice?" "Pancakes sound perfect," Grace said, and they climbed the stairs to their apartment, ready to rest and begin again in the morning. The stars continued to shine overhead, their light ancient and steady, watching over the quiet town as it moved forward into truth. Thursday dawned bright and clear, a fresh energy humming through the community center's halls. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes as volunteers set up for the day's activities. The first surprise came at 9:30 when Morrison's Hardware called. "We'd like to sponsor the monthly repair nights," the owner said, his gruff voice warm over the speaker. "Tools, materials, whatever you need." By 10, 3 more businesses had called with similar offers. The director's eyes grew misty as she updated the sponsorship board. "Look at this," she told Grace, gesturing to the growing list. "People remember what matters." Around 11, members of the quilting circle began arriving, their arms loaded with covered dishes. Mrs. Peterson, her silver hair neatly pinned back, set down a steaming casserole. "We've been meaning to do this," she said, patting Grace's hand. "Sometimes it takes a storm to remind us how to be neighbors again." The Robotics Club chose lunchtime to unveil their surprise. They'd spent weeks refurbishing a 3D printer, determined to expand the center's job skills program. The teens beamed as they demonstrated their work, explaining how it could help community members learn new technologies. "We could teach basic CAD skills," one sophomore explained, his enthusiasm contagious. "Maybe even start a small business course." At 3:30, Maya arrived with her band friends, instruments in tow. They set up in the courtyard, music stands catching the afternoon sun. By 4, a small crowd had gathered. Parents, neighbors, even a few curious passers-by. The first notes of their concert floated through the air, Maya's tuba providing a steady foundation for the melody. Parents who'd been whispering on messaging apps days ago now stood side by side, clapping between songs. The music seemed to wash away the last traces of scandal and speculation. Emma arrived as the concert ended, clutching a bouquet of bright daisies and wearing her clinic scrubs. Her face showed the mix of guilt and hope that comes with making amends. "I'm sorry," she said simply, holding out the flowers. "I got scared when everything blew up. Instead of standing by you, I told you to hide. That's not what friends do." Grace took the flowers, their fresh scent rising between them. "You were trying to protect me," she said softly. "I understand that." Emma's eyes welled up. "You and Daniel. It's real now, isn't it? Not just paper." Grace nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. Sometimes the best things start backwards. They hugged, the flowers crushed between them, years of friendship stronger than one moment of fear. As evening approached, Tommy, the shy teen Grace had helped during her first pantry shift, arrived with his toolbox. He'd been studying the center's flickering sign for weeks, determined to fix it. "The wiring's not too complicated." he explained, more confident now than he'd been months ago. Just needs some careful attention. Everyone gathered to watch as he worked, the sky darkening around them. When he made the final connection, the sign blazed to life, steady and bright. Cheers erupted from the crowd, making Tommy blush even as he grinned. At closing time, Grace and Daniel walked the halls together, checking locks and turning off lights. The day's events had left a warm glow that seemed to linger in every corner. "Ready to head home?" Daniel asked, offering his hand. Grace took it, their fingers intertwining naturally now. They stepped out into the cool evening air, walking slowly, savoring the quiet after such a full day. They paused under the porch light where they'd shared their first kiss, its gentle glow familiar and welcoming. The memory made Grace smile. "I've been thinking," Daniel said softly, turning to face her. "About us. About this marriage that started on paper." Grace squeezed his hand. "Me too. I want to do it right." He continued. "Not because we have to, but because we choose to. Make it real in every way." "I'd like that," Grace whispered. "No rush, though." Daniel shook his head. "No rush. We'll wait until the deal closes, until every pension is guaranteed and every promise is signed. A few weeks at most." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then maybe we could start planning something small? Just family and close friends?" "Something true," Grace agreed. "Like us." They stood there a moment longer, the porch light warm above them, their hands still linked. The day's events had shown them what they already knew, that sometimes the best things grow slowly, taking root in unexpected soil, blooming when the time is right. The center's newly repaired sign glowed steadily in the background, a beacon of promise for the community and for them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now they simply stood together, grateful for the strange and wonderful path that had led them here. The morning sun painted the river gold as Grace stood at their apartment window, coffee in hand. 4 weeks of careful work had finally come to fruition. The acquisition papers were signed, the benefit corporation framework locked in place. Every promise they'd made would be kept. She watched Daniel across the kitchen, straightening his tie with the same precise movements he used when fixing the center's old printer. He caught her eye and smiled. "Ready for today?" he asked. "More than ready," Grace replied, setting down her mug. By early afternoon, the community center's courtyard had transformed. Volunteers from the quilting circle had hung their finest works between posts, patterns of hearts, stars, and interlocking rings. Wildflowers spilled from mason jars on every surface, their sweet scent mixing with the river breeze. Emma and the clinic volunteers strung cafe lights in zigzag patterns overhead, creating a canopy of warm light that would glow as evening approached. The robotics club had even programmed small LED displays to twinkle softly in the growing shadows. At 3:30, Maya arrived with her fellow band members, all dressed in their best. They arranged their chairs in a semicircle, music stands gleaming. Maya's tuba caught the sunlight as she polished it one last time, her face serious with concentration. "Everything's perfect," she told Grace, who had slipped into the music room to change. "We practiced that processional piece until we could play it in our sleep." Grace hugged her tight. "Thank you, sweetheart." In the small office they'd converted to a dressing room, Grace smoothed the pale blue dress she'd chosen. Simple, elegant, honest, like the life they were building. Emma helped her pin fresh flowers in her hair, their hands steady with friendship. At 4 o'clock sharp, the first notes of music floated through the courtyard. Maya's tuba provided the foundation, just as she had that first night of their dance. The other instruments joined in. Flute, clarinet, violin, weaving together in perfect harmony. Daniel stood at the front, his grey suit crisp in the afternoon light. His eyes found Grace as she walked toward him, and the love in his gaze made her heart swell. Around them, familiar faces filled every chair. Pantry volunteers, teens from the robotics club, quilters who'd become like family. Even some of the Ellery manufacturing workers were there, now part of the new Worker Advisory Council, their pensions secure at last. They sat beside retirees who'd helped expose the truth, all of them witnesses to this moment of healing and hope. The center's director stood before them, holding a worn leather folder. She'd seen their story unfold from that first conversation about the caretaker apartment, through every challenge and triumph. These two, she began, her voice carrying clearly, came together first in service to others. They chose truth over comfort, courage over convenience. Today they choose each other, not out of necessity but out of love. Daniel's hands were warm as they held Grace's. His voice was steady as he spoke his vows. "I promise to be honest in all things, public and private," he said. "To put service before status, to keep our door open and our table ready for anyone in need, to face whatever comes together, with courage and faith." Grace's voice shook slightly, but her words rang true. "I promise to trust in the power of truth, to stand beside you in all seasons, to keep our home a place of welcome and peace, to face each day with hope and gratitude." They exchanged simple gold bands, their fingers trembling slightly. When the director pronounced them husband and wife, this time for love instead of convenience, the courtyard erupted in cheers. Maya's ensemble struck up a joyful tune as Daniel and Grace walked back down the aisle, hand in hand. Flower petals showered down, tossed by laughing children. The celebration that followed was perfectly them. Homemade cake on quilted tablecloths, lemonade in mason jars, music that made everyone want to dance. The robotics kids had even programmed their 3D printer to create tiny heart-shaped party favors, each one unique. As the sun began to set, the cafe lights twinkled to life overhead. Daniel pulled Grace close for another dance, this time without any of the uncertainty of their first. Other couples joined them, Emma and her husband, elderly couples who'd been married 50 years or more, teenagers swaying awkwardly but earnestly. At 7:30, Grace and Daniel joined the cleanup crew, just as they always did. They stacked chairs alongside volunteers, folded quilts with careful hands, and packed leftover cake into containers for tomorrow's breakfast. "You don't have to help," the director protested, but they just smiled. "It's who we are," Grace said simply. By 8, the courtyard was back in order, ready for Sunday's volunteer breakfast. They climbed the stairs to their apartment, tired but happy. Inside, Daniel automatically set their on-call pager on the kitchen counter, a habit born of months of shared responsibility. Grace smiled at the familiar gesture. "Some things don't change," she said softly. "The important things never should," Daniel replied, drawing her close. They fell asleep that night with their hands clasped, smiling in the darkness, ready to serve breakfast to their community family in the morning. The pager sat silent on the counter, a reminder of where their story began and how far they'd come. 6 months had transformed the community center's basement into a bustling retraining lab. Steady hum of machinery mixed with voices, experienced machinists explaining proper tool angles to newcomers, parents leaning over computer screens to master CAD software, and teenagers hunched over soldering stations with careful concentration. Grace moved through the space, clipboard in hand, checking schedules and answering questions. She paused to watch an older worker demonstrate the perfect lathe technique to a young mother who'd never touched industrial equipment before. The woman's face lit up as the metal piece took shape exactly as planned. In his corner office, Daniel reviewed grant applications for the Community Investment Fund. He'd insisted on keeping his workspace modest, just a desk, a few chairs, and a wall of photos showing successful graduates with their completion certificates. The benefit corporation structure had done exactly what they'd hoped: protected pensions, created opportunities, and rebuilt trust. Down the hall, music drifted from the practice rooms. Maya sat with a 7th grader, patiently explaining proper breathing techniques for brass instruments. She'd grown into her role as a peer mentor, showing younger students that music could be both an escape and a bridge to connection. The kitchen upstairs filled with the warm scent of pancakes and coffee. Grace flipped another stack of blueberry pancakes while Daniel manned the bacon station. Saturday morning volunteer breakfasts had become a cherished tradition, drawing people from every corner of their community. "These are even better than last week," Emma said, stealing a warm pancake straight from the griddle. She'd become a regular volunteer at their medical screening events. The dining room buzzed with conversation about the afternoon's neighborhood cleanup. The robotics kids had designed special grabbers for picking up trash, and the quilting circle had sewn bright safety vests for everyone. "We've got 30 signed up already," Grace announced, causing a ripple of pleased murmurs around the tables. An elderly man in a worn veteran's cap approached their serving station hesitantly. Grace recognized him from food pantry days. Jim, she remembered, widowed last spring. "Mom," he said quietly, twisting his napkin. "I heard you folks still help with housing paperwork. My lease is up next month, and these forms—" His voice trailed off. Grace's heart warmed at the memory of her own housing crisis, how it had led her to this very spot. She set down her spatula and smiled. "That's exactly how we started. Let's get you sorted. Come by my office after breakfast." Jim's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Yes, Mum, thank you." The morning sun streamed through the windows as volunteers finished their meals. Grace and Daniel stepped outside for a moment of quiet before the day's activities began. The center's sign glowed steadily against the winter sky. No more flickering, thanks to that shy teen who'd fixed it months ago. Daniel squeezed Grace's hand, their wedding bands catching the light. "Remember when we thought this was just about solving a housing problem?" he asked softly. Grace leaned into his shoulder, watching Maya through the window as she helped set up the cleanup supplies. "God had bigger plans," she replied. The lab downstairs was filling up again. Saturday sessions were always popular. They could hear the mechanical hum starting up, the cheerful greetings, the sound of people learning and growing together. Daniel, Grace, and Maya walked back inside, heading toward the lab where new beginnings were taking shape every day. Maya carried her tuba case. She had another student waiting. Grace had housing forms to simplify. Daniel had more dreams to fund. Together, they moved through the busy hallways of the place that had become more than a community center. It was the heart of their shared mission to make room for everyone at life's table. The continuity of their days stretched before them, intact and shining with possibility. The familiar rhythm of service surrounded them, machinery whirring, music playing, voices learning, lives changing. Just another ordinary Saturday made extraordinary by love, truth, and the simple act of showing up for each other, day after day after day.